If you're not planning on going missing, do not travel to New England. However, if you do plan on going missing, that is the place nobody will look for you. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Line. On November 3rd, 2003, two police officers arrived at a residence in Amherst, Massachusetts to conduct a sting operation. Earlier that evening, their department received a call from a young woman reporting that her Fleet Bank credit card appeared to have been stolen, after she discovered a series of charges dating from October 20th onward, which she was certain she had not made. The thief hadn't spent much, with the 6 fraudulent purchases totaling just $79.02, but they had ordered quite a bit of pizza from several shops around town. Officer Carlos Rivera was given the responsibility of investigating the situation, and as he followed up with the restaurants indicated by the report and confirmed by the bank records, he collected receipts from Pinocchio's, Domino's, and Papa Gino's, with only the last restaurant being one frequented by the card's actual owner. From those receipts, he learned that whoever had stolen the card had a thing for chicken Caesar and fajita wraps, cheese pizzas, garlic bread, and mozzarella sticks. So Rivera may have surmised that those purchases indicated a college student as the culprit, but the fact that they'd all been delivered to an address at Kennedy Hall on the UMass Amherst campus confirmed it. What Officer Rivera couldn't prove was precisely which resident of that dorm was placing the orders. Each receipt bore the same signature, but the police would need to catch the thief in the act if they were to ensure that this hadn't been stolen as well. To that end, he instructed the managers of each of the relevant restaurants to call the police if someone attempted to pay using the card in question. As it happened, the very night of the report, someone did just that, and the Amherst PD sent out patrol officers Pinkham and Reardon to set up a sting. On the orders of the police, Pinocchio sent a driver out to Kennedy Hall with an empty box and called the buyer back with a 15-minute delivery estimate. The driver met the buyer outside of the building, took a signature, and then at that moment, the two officers emerged from their hiding places to confront the thief. She was a 22-year-old college student from Hanson, Massachusetts, and she didn't try to argue about what had just happened. Instead, she complied with their requests, identified herself, and allowed them to follow her up to her room, where she handed over a Fleet Visa debit card bearing her own name. But it didn't match the number on the receipt she'd signed just moments earlier. Something here was off. Officer Pinkham, according to his own report, informed her that now was the time to come clean about where she'd gotten the stolen card number. She thought for a moment, then replied that she had taken the numbers off of the Pinocchio's receipt that she had found on the ground. Pinkham turned to his partner and asked if the receipt in his hand included the full number of the card used to make the purchase, only for Officer Reardon to reply that it did not. It only showed the last 4 digits. Pinkham then turned back to the young woman and asked her once again where she'd obtained the stolen number, only for her to say that maybe it was from a Domino's receipt rather than Pinocchio's. Asked how she remembered the full 16-digit number, she simply looked down at the ground in silence, but after further prompting, walked over to her desk and retrieved a note card with the correct number written on it, as well as several phone numbers and that of a dorm room in the same hall. Officer Pinkham made his way down to the relevant room and knocked on the door, which was opened by another female student. The patrolman then asked if she had any fraudulent charges on her card, and he was told that while the resident of that particular room didn't, her friend who lived in the same building did. Pinkham asked her to call that friend, who arrived soon after, and confirmed that she too had ordered food to the room number written on the note card, and that she had discarded the receipts in empty boxes in the trash room down the hall. A trash room located between that room and the one occupied by the now suspect. The officers then informed the owner of the stolen card that she could expect to hear from Officer Rivera soon and return to speak with their suspect. Upon questioning, she admitted to using the card 6 times, though she refused to explain why she had done so, and the officers left without performing an arrest. 6 days later, the Amherst PD called their suspect in for an interview with Officer Rivera. He showed her all of the evidence compiled against her, informed her of the status of the investigation, and the fact that she was the main suspect for a number of concrete reasons. Though she was not being detained at that moment, was not required to answer any questions, and would not be arrested at the conclusion of the interview. Upon acknowledging that she understood the circumstances, Officer Rivera proceeded to ask her if she had used the card in question, and she confirmed once again that she had, though she did dispute making any purchases from Papa Gino's. Officer Rivera thanked her for her time and honesty, informed her that she was going to be charged for an unauthorized use of a credit card, and would receive her court summons in the mail. And then she was offered the opportunity to make a written statement regarding why she had done this, which again, to that point, she still had not explained. She once again declined the offer to explain herself, but did apologize for what she'd done, and even offered to make restitution for the stolen money, at which point Officer Rivera advised her that he would notify the court of her cooperation. With that, she left the building, and Rivera turned to writing his report about this strange case and its even stranger defendant. Her name was Maura Murray, and in just a few months, she'd become the subject of one of the most famous missing persons cases of the 21st century. Maura would go on to disappear on February 9, 2004, after driving her 1996 Saturn S Series off the shoulder of a rural New Hampshire highway, and in the 21 years since that night, a number of theories about what happened have gained popularity. Journalist and author James Renner believes that she may have deliberately gone missing in order to start a new life. Brianna Maitland case investigator Greg Overacker has suggested that both girls might have been victims of a serial killer. Others still argue that she was abducted, either by someone who lured her out to that lonely stretch of road, or simply as a victim of opportunity. All of these theories have their merits and their flaws, and in order to understand why they formed, we have to go back to the very last time Maura was seen alive, and what happened in the days leading up to that moment. Now, as with any missing persons case, there are quite a few factors that go into the story. But the first factor we're going to talk about is today's sponsor, Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that we have been raving about for the last, 3 years now, basically. Yeah, and there's a reason for that. It's that we genuinely like Factor. I've got some sitting in my fridge at home that I actually can't stop thinking about. I'm not going to get to eat it tonight, so I'm waiting on tomorrow. Like, I remember when we first started working with them, I was legitimately excited for each new Factor meal because they are legitimately that tasty. The one I'm thinking about right now is a Thanksgiving home-style turkey and gravy that is just gonna make my night tomorrow so much better. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good home-cooked meal. I like cooking myself, and my girlfriend does an even better job of it than I do, but we are both busy working adults, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to just pop something in the microwave and go to town on that. Now, Aiden, you might be thinking, why go with microwaved food instead of takeout? There's a number of reasons. All of them are good ones. One of them is that Factor has a lot of options, usually 35 or more menu options per week. And of course, you can add on to that. You can get breakfast options, there's snacks, there's smoothies, there's juices, and all of it is dietitian organized, dietitian approved. And of course, the meals themselves are chef crafted, which is the same kind of thing you get when you go with takeout, but takeout is, especially if you use like a delivery service, upwards of $50 for 2 people to eat. Meanwhile, Factor, if you're going with 2 meals, that's going to average out to $24, so you're spending half the money or less. It also gets there quicker because takeout takes half an hour to an hour to arrive, meanwhile Factor takes 2 minutes in the microwave. And then, of course, there's the calories. There's just the size of that meal. I love to go out and get a nice big feast of Mexican or Chinese or something like that, but then I'm eating 3,000 calories that I really didn't need to consume. Meanwhile, Factor has a completely reasonable amount of calories per meal, and they're printed right there on the box along with all the nutrition facts. So with Factor, you actually know what you're eating. And I know if you go to the grocery store, you look at the microwavable meals section, they're usually pretty limited in selection. That's, again, 35 plus meals every week. And they're actually filling. It's not like those little TV dinners where, yeah, it's food, but eh. Now, Factor does come in a similar sized tray, and you can't eat it out of that tray, but if you take it out and put it on a real plate, it actually looks like food, unlike some of the competitor options. I guess what I'm trying to say here is whether you've got a busy lifestyle, you're not very good at cooking yourself, you're trying to stay on a solid diet, or you're just working on a budget, Factor is a great way to get the kind of food you want in a nice, easy package without the expense, without the wait times, and without the excessive calories. So if you'd like to see for yourself why it is that we have been working with Factor for basically our entire lifetime as a sponsored YouTube channel, you can head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50LoreLodge to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. Again, that's code 50LoreLodge at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. On the night of February 5th and into the morning of February 6, 2004, Maura Murray was working at the campus security desk in Melville Hall on the UMass Amherst campus. Previously a cadet at West Point, Maura had made the change after deciding that the military lifestyle wasn't really for her. But the academic rigor and highly motivated spirit which earned her a place at the prestigious military academy hadn't left when she did. She managed to make the dean's list while also working and running on the school's track team, and most who knew her saw a bright future ahead. On this particular night, however, something didn't seem right. It was around 1:20 a.m. when her shift supervisor, Karen Mayotte, realized that Maura seemed to be struggling emotionally. For reasons that were unclear at the time, Maura had started crying, but when Karen tried to comfort her, she refused to explain what caused her distress. And for reasons that are unclear at this current time, Wikipedia suggests that Maura cryptically choked out the words "my sister" to Mayotte when asked what was wrong, despite the fact that none of the three sources cited for that statement contain this information. What the sources do tell us is that Maura had been speaking to her older sister Kathleen earlier during her shift, though at the time, nobody knew what that call was about. Recognizing that whatever it was probably more important than staying at her desk, Karen comforted Maura before escorting her back to her room in Kennedy Hall. Whatever was bothering Maura, the Whitman-Hanson Express reported in June of 2007, she did not share it with her friends or her father, who visited her at UMass the next day on Saturday, February 7th. And I do want to give a huge shout out here to Marybeth Conway of the Whitman-Hanson Express for an absolutely phenomenal article, series of articles really, that she wrote on this case and which helped me to form the framework of this series. Now, Fred Murray had always doted on his youngest daughter, coaching her youth sports teams, attending high school track meets, taking her on camping trips in the mountains of New Hampshire, and on that weekend, he was looking to set her up with a more reliable vehicle. Her 1996 Saturn was on its last legs, with just 3 of its engine's 4 cylinders operational, and Fred wasn't comfortable with her driving it any longer. After a long day of scouting out the local dealers, they settled on a 3-year-old Geo Prism, which is a car I have never heard of before this exact moment of writing the script, and with that objective squared away, they headed off for dinner with Maura's friend Kate Markopoulos. The father and daughter pair had a tradition of trying out a new brew pub every time Dad visited, and this time they ended up at the Amherst Brewing Company on North Pleasant Street. After dinner, Maura had plans to attend a small dorm party on campus, and for unknown reasons, Fred offered to let Maura drive his new Toyota Corolla for the night, despite the fact that she wasn't really planning to go anywhere. Regardless, Maura took him up on the offer and drove him back to the Quality Inn on Russell Street in nearby Hadley, before returning to campus around 10:30 p.m. She spent the next 4 hours with Kate and a few other friends, drinking sky blue malts and wine until about 2:30 in the morning. At that point, Maura made a decision that her friends would later say struck them as odd. She wanted to return her father's car. They tried to talk her out of this, and ultimately she told them that she planned to just walk home to Kennedy Hall, but instead she went to get the car and began making her way to Hadley. She was on her way there when, around 3:30 a.m., she crashed into either a post or a guardrail, causing $8,000 to $10,000 worth of damage to the Corolla. Surprisingly, despite Maura's intoxicated state, no field sobriety or breathalyzer tests were conducted, and no charges were filed as a result of the crash. Police then gave Maura a ride to her father's hotel, where the shaken-up and extremely apologetic 21-year-old informed her dad of what had happened. Fred, to his credit, handled the situation with care, later telling the Whitman-Hanson Express that if this is the only trouble a kid ever causes, then you're pretty lucky as a parent. Then, shortly after arriving back at the Quality Inn, Maura borrowed Fred's cell phone and called her boyfriend, U.S. Army Captain Billy Roche, who at the time was a lieutenant stationed at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. By all accounts, their conversation went as it should have, with Billy consoling the young woman that he and everyone else expected he would one day marry. Fred and Maura spent the rest of that morning, Sunday, February 8th, on the phone with his insurance company. They confirmed that they would cover the damages, and that seems to have settled the matter as far as Fred was concerned. Maura agreed to fill out the proper accident report forms with the police, and Fred rented a car in order to attend a business obligation in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He made sure to call his daughter later that evening, around 11:30 p.m., to remind her to pick up the forms in the morning, and she said that she'd give him a call around 8 p.m. the next day to go over the paperwork with him. As far as anyone could tell, the situation was handled, and everything should have been resolved without issue. But for some reason, Maura proceeded to make a series of strange, and to this day unexplained decisions. Late that night, shortly after her conversation with her father, Maura jumped onto MapQuest to search for routes to Burlington, Vermont, and the Berkshires of western Massachusetts. And after this, she seems to have gone to bed. Hours later, shortly before 1 o'clock p.m., she called Dominic and Linda Salamone, owners of a condo in Bartlett, New Hampshire, where she and her family had stayed on prior occasions. Now, the precise details of that conversation are unknown, but Maura did not end up renting from them. What we do know is that that call lasted approximately 3 minutes, and then at 1 o'clock p.m. on the dot, she emailed Billy. Her message to him read, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promised to call today, though. Love you, Maura," which would suggest that he had tried to check in on her at some point after their call on Sunday morning. Whatever the case, the next call Maura made was to a fellow nursing student, and once again, the details of that conversation are unclear. Not long after finishing that call, Maura sent an email to her professors and her supervisor at work, informing them that there had been a death in her family and that she would be taking a week off to deal with the situation. But this was a lie, as nobody on either side of Maura's family had passed away. Maura's next known action came at 2:05 p.m. when she contacted 1-800-GO-STOW, a line which connected travelers with hotels in the area of Stowe, Vermont. Once again, she made no reservations, and as would be expected, nobody thought to record the specifics of her request. She finally called Billy at 2:18 p.m., but he didn't pick up, and so she left a message promising to talk to him later. A little over an hour after that, at 3:30, Maura got into her barely drivable Saturn and drove to a nearby ATM, where a security camera recorded her as she took out $280 in cash, which was most of the money in her account. She then stopped at a liquor store and spent $40 of that money on alcohol, including bottles of Bailey's Irish Cream, Kahlua coffee liqueur, vodka, and a box of wine, and then she left Amherst. Several hours later, at 7:27 p.m. on February 9, 2004, the Grafton County Sheriff's Department received a call from the Westman residence at 70 Wild Ammonoosuc Road outside of Haverhill, New Hampshire. On the other end of the line was Faith Westman, reporting that there had been some kind of accident outside of her rural home. After hearing a loud thump around 7 p.m., she looked out her window to see a black sedan stuck in a ditch a short distance away, facing westbound off the eastbound side of the road. When dispatcher Rhonda Marcia pressed for more information, Faith told her that she couldn't tell if anyone looked hurt, but she could see a man in the vehicle smoking a cigarette. The operator then contacted the Haverhill Police Department, who sent Sergeant Cecil Smith out to the scene. Before he could arrive, however, the Grafton County Sheriff's Department received a second call about the same vehicle. That call came in from school bus driver Butch Atwood, who lived just a little ways further down the road at 4 Wild Ammonoosuc, and he too reported seeing the black sedan. In fact, he'd done more than just see it. He'd actually stopped and had spoken to the young woman standing nearby. She had long dark hair, worn down, and appeared to be shaken up but not injured. He'd offered to call police for her, but she'd declined and told him that she'd already called AAA for roadside assistance. Atwood, who was still concerned for her well-being given the cold weather, asked if she would like to wait inside at his house, but once again, the young woman declined the offer and chose to stay with her car. So, having exhausted his options, the bus driver drove the last 100 yards or so back to his house, but at that point it occurred to him that it was very unlikely anyone could contact AAA, given the sparse cell coverage in the area, hence why he then called the police for assistance. Now, it wasn't that Butch Atwood thought the girl was up to anything nefarious, but rather that his tall, heavy-set frame at 350 pounds might have intimidated her, and she might be willing to trust a uniformed officer more than she would trust a complete stranger. But when Sergeant Smith arrived at the scene just a few minutes after Atwood called in his report, the girl was nowhere to be seen. Maura Murray had vanished into thin air. Fred Murray learned of his daughter's disappearance approximately 22 hours after she was last seen by Butch Atwood. He was still in Bridgeport when Kathleen, Maura's elder sister, called with the news. Fred immediately called the Haverhill Police Department and pleaded with them to immediately begin searching for his youngest daughter, only to be told that the New Hampshire Fish and Game Service could begin a search the following day if Maura still hadn't turned up by then, despite the fact that temperatures were well below freezing at night. Completing the absolute bare minimum of their responsibilities, the department agreed to immediately list Maura as a missing person at 5:17 p.m. on Tuesday, February 10, 2004. To be fair, they hadn't completely wasted their time since finding her car abandoned on the side of the road. When Sergeant Smith arrived on the scene the night prior, he'd done a cursory search of the area. He later reported that evidence at the scene indicated the vehicle had been eastbound and had gone off the roadway, struck some trees, spun around, and come to rest facing the wrong way in the eastbound lane. Strangely, a rag from the car's emergency kit was stuffed into the vehicle's tailpipe, and while that could have caused the vehicle to stall if it were jammed tight enough, it would not have caused the car to careen off the road and strike a tree as it had. Inside the sedan, he'd found a box of Franzia wine behind the driver's seat of the vehicle and a red liquid on the driver's side door and ceiling of the car, as well as a Coke bottle that contained a red liquid with a strong alcoholic odor. The box of wine had been damaged, potentially in the crash, but the more interesting part was the fact that none of the other bottles of alcohol that Maura had bought in Amherst were found in the car. Adding to the intrigue, the Whitman-Hanson Express reported that other items found in Maura's car were a AAA card, insurance forms, gloves, compact discs, makeup, computer-generated directions for Burlington and Stowe, Vermont, and a book Maura had been reading by Nicholas Howe, Not Without Peril, as well as clothes, toiletries, textbooks, and even birth control pills. And according to Brianna Maitland PI Greg Overacker, who got his information on this from Maura's other older sister, Julie, Maura had also packed running shoes, workout clothes, the blank accident report forms, and even several pieces of diamond jewelry. As Sergeant Smith conducted his search, EMS and the local fire department arrived on scene. The paramedics didn't stay long, as they had nobody to treat and were needed elsewhere, but the firemen stuck around to secure the site and look for any sign of Maura. Meanwhile, Smith drove down to Atwood's house, where he found the man sitting inside of his bus. Smith reportedly tapped on the window and asked where the girl was, only for Atwood to say that he hadn't seen anything since leaving the abandoned sedan. So the two men decided it would be best to just drive the area in search of the missing woman. Smith reportedly headed west along Wild Ammonoosuc, also known as Route 112, while Atwood would later tell the Caledonian Record that he took a ride around the back roads for about 15 minutes, and then drove to French Pond. The Express clarified that Atwood's route took him in a loop from Mountain Lakes, a nearby recreational and residential area, to the Swiftwater Stage Shop General Store, but it's unclear if anyone drove eastbound on Wild Ammonoosuc. Whatever the case, neither man saw any sign of Maura, and at 9:27 p.m., Sergeant Smith received a call dispatching him to a more immediate, yet unrelated problem on Limekiln Road in North Haverhill. The fire department was already gone by that point, and the Saturn had been towed to Lavoie's Auto Care Center on Route 10 in Haverhill. With that, the first night of the investigation, unofficial as it was at the time, came to an end, though there are some discrepancies regarding what exactly happened that night. According to the Whitman-Hanson Express, Faith Westman and Butch Atwood were not the only people to see Maura that night. According to the Express's 2007 series of articles entitled Maura is Missing, the Murat family were also home at the time, and they told the Express, "From our kitchen window, we saw a car down the road with trouble lights flashing and someone walking around the car." John Murat believed that he'd seen the car back up parallel to the road at one point, though the Caledonian Record reported on Friday, February 20th, 2004 that due to the crash, the car's radiator was pushed back into the fan, making the vehicle inoperable. Though it should be said that given the design of that model of car, it is possible that that specific kind of damage would not have prevented it from moving short distances for a short while afterwards. And because I'm not really a car person, I'm gonna let Thornbury explain that to you.
From what I could find online of the car, the engine in that model was not how you would normally expect an engine to be sat in an engine bay. Normally you think of an engine kind of being front to back, but in smaller cars with smaller engines, sometimes they'll be actually sideways in the engine bay. So in a lot of older cars, you would have the fan for the radiator be directly connected on the front to back engine as a form of flywheel. Well, on these sideways facing engine cars, that's not possible. They have their own flywheel, they have their own mechanism for keeping time, and the radiator fan is a totally separate mechanism. In this car, it was an electric radiator driven by a motor, and so at that point, if the radiator and the fan were completely damaged and completely inoperable, basically totaled, that doesn't necessarily mean that the engine itself was totaled, and that doesn't mean that the car would be inoperable. It's very likely, especially under these conditions, that the car would still have been able to be moved under its own power. It's just that for long distances, it would not have been able to appropriately cool itself, potentially overheated, and then caused irreparable damage. Now that's assuming that the engine was still in good condition, and that the reporting on the radiator and the radiator fan was incomplete. So it may be the case that the entire front of the car was totaled, but based on the images that we see from the car, that's unlikely, so it is possible that it was capable of being moved around still.
He spoke well, and thus he shall live another day. Anyway, there was also the claim from Faith Westman that she'd seen a man smoking a cigarette in the car, which Maura's friends and family thought was odd for a number of reasons. First of all, Maura was a woman, and second of all, she despised smoking. There was the possibility that someone else was in the car with her, but Faith's husband Tim argued his wife was simply mistaken. To him, it appeared there was a young woman using a cell phone, and that the red light Faith believed was a cigarette was in reality a light from the device. Perhaps most intriguing of the observations, the Express reported that after Atwood drove away, Faith Westman noticed the Saturn's interior lights switch on and off and witnessed a flurry of activity at the rear of the car, including a person standing at the trunk, an item of information which came from private investigator John Smith, who spoke with the Westmans after the incident. Now, Butch Atwood got the closest look of any of the witnesses, and his story was reported in a couple of different ways. Atwood himself said that when he arrived, Maura struggled to get out of her Saturn because the door was hitting against a snowbank. Regarding Maura's physical appearance, he told the Caledonian Record that he saw no blood and that she was cold and shivering. The disparity in storytelling, though minor, came with the conversation that the two had. Atwood told the press that he'd stepped out of the bus to ask Maura if she wanted him to call the police, and that she'd told him not to bother because she'd already called AAA. It would later be confirmed that his hunch about her not being able to do that was correct, and that Maura had in fact not called AAA. But the important part is how this differs from the description given by New Hampshire State Police Lieutenant John Scarinza later that year. According to a synopsis of the case which he authored, when Atwood stated that he was going to call local law enforcement to come assist, Maura pleaded with him not to call police, a statement which carries quite a bit of subtext. You see, from the night of the crash, police seem to have been skeptical of Maura's sobriety. Sergeant Smith mentioned the box of wine and the Coke bottle with an alcoholic smell, while Scarinza's words could be interpreted as an implication that Maura was deliberately avoiding contact with the police. And this may have colored their decision not to pursue a search on the 10th, and to delay any further efforts until the 11th when Fred asked them to launch a search immediately. Atwood, for his part, told reporters that Maura had not appeared intoxicated when he spoke to her. And in one more fit of initial incompetence, the Haverhill Police Department issued a bolo for Maura Murray, in which they inaccurately described her as being 5 foot 3 inches tall, with black hair that reached down just below her shoulders. In reality, Maura was 5'7", with brown hair that reached only to her shoulders, and which she typically wore in a bun. It would not be the last time that a decision made by that department caused difficulties in the case, and Fred Murray would battle the system repeatedly in the coming months. Maura's father, for his part, got involved in the case as soon as he could, arriving in Haverhill early the morning of the 11th to take part in the search. It was just before dawn when he pulled into the modest parking lot of the Haverhill Police Department, which ran out of the small town's sole administrative building along Dartmouth College Highway. With a population of just 4,500 people, Haverhill fields a small law enforcement force of just 4 patrol officers and 1 detective, so they weren't exactly equipped to run a large-scale missing persons search. If Maura was going to be found, it would require more than just the efforts of those few uniforms and Fred Murray. Thankfully, the call was answered, not just by Maura's loved ones, but also by the New Hampshire State Police, Fish and Game, and a canine unit, and it began to look like there was a chance of finding her before it was too late. As the search effort kicked into gear on that cold Wednesday morning, law enforcement split duties with the volunteers. The dog team was deployed directly to the crash site to see if their animals could pick up a scent trail, while Fred Murray scanned the ground around the scene for any sign of footprints. Overhead, a Fish and Game helicopter did the same from the air, hoping that the lack of snow since Monday night would have preserved whatever path she might have taken through the 2.5-foot deep drifts. Meanwhile, those of Maura's siblings who were within driving distance, those being Kathleen, her older brother Freddie, and her younger brother Curtis, were already surveying the various tourist towns nestled throughout the area, many of which had served as vacation homes for their family over the years. They stopped into motels and restaurants in towns like North Woodstock and Lincoln, and traveled as far east as Bartlett and Conway, but nobody had seen hide nor hair of the missing nursing student, and there wasn't much success on the law enforcement side either. Both the helicopter and the ground team failed to find any human tracks in the vicinity of the crash. The dog team briefly tracked a scent from one of Maura's gloves, but as so often happens, the dog lost it some 100 yards down the road, east of the crash site. According to the Express, the abrupt loss of Maura's scent in the middle of the road prompted officials to speculate that Maura got into a passing vehicle, though whether she did so voluntarily or was forced remains open to question. With the sunlight dwindling and little progress made, the search teams reported back to the Haverhill Police Department around 5:00 p.m. to regroup. It was around this time that Billy Roche and his parents arrived. The Army lieutenant had requested leave from Fort Sill when he learned of Maura's disappearance, and police were quick to put him into an interrogation room. They questioned him for a while in private, and then again with parents Sharon and Bill, before allowing all 3 of them to join the effort. And as it turned out, Billy hadn't just brought himself. He'd also brought a potential lead in the form of a voicemail left while he was traveling from Oklahoma. According to Sharon Roche, the message was very short and consisted of a shivering, soft whimpering sound with labored breathing as if someone was very cold. Immediately upon learning of that call, everyone had the same question. Could it have been Maura? Answering that question, however, was going to be more difficult than they might have hoped. First of all, the call had not come from Maura's cell phone, or any cell phone for that matter. Instead, it traced to a prepaid AT&T calling card, potentially one of two that Sharon had purchased for Maura the previous Thanksgiving. Now, for those too young to remember, which honestly includes me, the way these cards would work is that you would go to a public phone and you would dial a number that would connect you to, I guess, the operator. You'd then type in a PIN and then type in the number you wish to call, and that was how it charged your card. The problem was that identifying what kind of calling card it had come from was where the ability to trace the call ended, at least according to the family. New Hampshire State Police would eventually conclude that the call traced to the American Red Cross, but Sharon Rosh has roundly disputed that claim. Speaking directly to the Express in 2007, she told a reporter that she could say with certainty that, contrary to New Hampshire State Police info, the call could not be traced, because they lacked the PIN and card number associated with that card. It just doesn't make any sense that the call was from the Red Cross, she continued, because if they had been trying to call Billy, they never called back. Furthermore, she noted that the soft crying, sniffling, and muffled sobs couldn't logically be connected with the Red Cross either. But the state police, that didn't matter. As far as they were concerned, the call came from the Red Cross, and that meant it wasn't relevant to the disappearance. As far as the events of the 11th went, however, the search had made little progress. The only lead they had was the abrupt drop-off of the scent trail along the road, and so they focused their efforts on the possibility that she may have gotten into a car with someone. Still, that didn't explain why she'd come to New Hampshire in the first place, and that was a rather important factor in the case. By the end of the search day, the Haverhill police speculated that Maura planned to end her own life or had planned to run away, citing their belief that there was no evidence of foul play or that Maura had wandered into the woods. Already working to bring an end to the search, Haverhill Police Chief Jeff Williams asserted that, at the age of 21, Maura was within her legal rights to not want to be found. Maura's loved ones, on the other hand, vehemently disagreed. Sharon Rosh later told reporters, "I cannot believe that there would be any problem in her life that would cause her to run away from three close groups of people in her life. Her family, Billy and his family, and the very close-knit group of Hanson High School girlfriends." Fred Murray held the same opinion, unable to recall any pattern of behavior or traumatic events which might have led his daughter to do such a thing. The only thing that came to mind was the car crash a few nights prior, but Maura had essentially walked away from that without any consequences. And I didn't put it in the script, but it also occurs to me now that the things she brought with her do not suggest she had any plans of harming herself. You don't bring diamond earrings and birth control pills and your textbooks if you plan on leaving this world behind. And as everybody in her life agreed, there didn't seem to be a reason for her to leave her life behind either. Anyway, with that, the first day of the search came to a close, and the Murray camp retreated to the Wells River Motel in Vermont, just across the Connecticut River from Woodsville, New Hampshire. The modest, cozy refuge, as described by the Whitman-Hanson Express, would become their home for the foreseeable future, and the next morning they headed back out to Haverhill for day 2 of the search. Thursday the 12th saw the beginning of media involvement in the case, as police issued a press release stating that Maura may be en route to the Kankamegas Highway area and was listed as endangered and possibly a danger to herself. Additionally, the release stated that witnesses at the scene reported seeing a lone female with no apparent injuries who appeared impaired due to alcohol consumption. And this claim appeared in spite of the fact that the only witness to speak with Maura, that being Butch Atwood, had described her as not appearing intoxicated or otherwise impaired. Yet another link in a chain of questionable actions made by the Haverhill Police Department during the most crucial phase of the investigation and search effort. As the family wrestled with law enforcement in New Hampshire, another search was underway back in Amherst. UMass and Amherst police, who just months earlier had searched Maura's room for that stolen credit card number, were now combing through her dorm for any evidence that might explain why she'd left, where she'd been trying to go, and what she intended to do when she got there. It was during this time that certain details first came to light, such as Maura's lie about a death in the family, her ATM withdrawal, and her liquor store purchase, as well as her breakdown at work a week prior, and some details suggesting that she might have either packed up her room or had not yet unpacked after getting back from winter break. Kathleen Murray would tell police that she and Maura had spoken on the phone on that evening of February the 5th around 10:30 p.m., but that their conversation was regular, just trying to get through the day kind of stuff, and that when she heard Maura had been crying later that night, she couldn't understand what about their conversation might have caused that kind of a response. Back in New Hampshire, the two most important men in Maura's life met with reporters for a press conference in Bethlehem, New Hampshire. According to the Express, Fred used this opportunity to speak directly to his daughter, just in case she had run away on purpose and might be listening to the news. "I don't know what the matter is, or the trouble you think you might be in, but it isn't anything we can't solve," he said through the media. "It's me. You can tell me. We'll work it out until we solve it." Then, Billy informed the press of something that really leaves me stunned as a historian of missing persons cases. Police were already suspending the search. There had been no evidence that Maura had disappeared from that crash site intentionally. She had left no notes, and had packed books, clothes, and even jewelry. And even if she planned to run away from Amherst, that didn't mean she'd chosen to leave the crash site on foot, or that she wasn't in danger as a result. Furthermore, neither her credit and debit cards nor her cell phone had been used since Monday, meaning that for all anyone knew, she could still be lost outdoors. And that degree of incompetence was about to get so very much worse. Maura's family wasn't willing to throw in the towel just because the Haverhill police were. And on Friday, they began calling and visiting with police stations across the river in Vermont. Maura had printed out directions to two of that state's towns, Burlington and Stowe, so it only seemed reasonable that she might have tried to continue on to one of those places after crashing her car. When Fred contacted Vermont police, however, he learned that they didn't know anything about Maura. Not only had the Haverhill police failed to extend their bolo to departments just across the river, in the very state where her MapQuest directions suggested she was going, but they had also neglected to inform any of the departments to their east along Route 112. And as soon as Fred Murray learned of these failures, whatever faith remained in the Haverhill officers was shattered, and his efforts became far more direct. In the week following the suspension of the official search, the Murrays and their friends hit the ground harder than anyone had in the first few days. They knocked on doors, made telephone calls, and spoke with residents, the Express reported, including those who had called 911. Fred and Billy went on CNN to speak with Soledad O'Brien, describing her actions that Monday as completely out of character, and noting that she follows through on what she says she's going to do, referring to her stated plans to call both her father and her boyfriend on that fateful evening. With permission from property owners, Fred himself trudged through snow, brush, and debris, leaving no stone unturned as he battled the elements in search of any sign of his missing daughter. And in the course of doing so, he uncovered yet another shocking oversight by the Haverhill police. Aside from the witnesses they'd spoken to on the night of Maura's accident, they hadn't interviewed a soul who lived on Wild Ammonoosuc Road. Fred read them the riot act on the 18th, and as a result, the state police, along with Fish and Game, hit the ground once more to perform a second search the next day. This time they brought 3 dogs, while the helicopter team conducted a more wide-ranging scan of a 2-mile radius around the crash site. Ground crews checked trails and roadways all over the area, but their efforts still turned up nothing. The good news, at least in a way, was that the state police were taking it a little bit more seriously than the locals had. While they didn't list Maura's case as a criminal investigation, Sergeant Tom York told reporters that the term was just a label and that police would be treating the case much as they could a criminal investigation. What he meant was that they were actively collecting background information, looking into leads, and trying to piece together what could have happened that night if Maura hadn't intended to disappear. Sadly, they found nothing, and once again, authorities made the decision to suspend their efforts, albeit with considerably more reason to do so than the first time around. There was a brief glimmer of hope on the 26th, when Kathleen Murray found a pair of women's underwear in the snow near French Pond, but the DNA testing needed to determine if they belonged to Maura would take 2 weeks to come back. The Murrays were exhausted, their friends needed to get back to work, and there was nothing else they could do except to wait. So, on March 2nd, they checked out of the Wells River Motel and headed back to Massachusetts. 17 days later, Brianna Maitland's car was found crashed into the side of a barn off of a rural Vermont highway, and questions about a potential serial killer began to mount. As for that part of the story, a number of further just bizarre decisions by law enforcement, and the theories about what might have happened to Maura as well as Brianna, that's what we're going to be covering next week. I hadn't initially planned for this to be a 2-part series, but as I got deeper and deeper into research and into writing this script, I came to the conclusion that the best way to give the most detail and the best version of this story was to break it up so that I could do justice to this narrative. I've already started writing that, and I'm already about 4 pages in, so I would not expect this to take more than 2 episodes. I don't foresee this becoming a JonBenet Ramsey situation, but it really seemed like the best way to go about this was a 2-part series. I do apologize for having to break it up. That is never my goal with these kinds of videos, But we are grateful for your support nonetheless, and I would like to tell you that if you want to support us more directly, you can do so by going to Patreon and becoming a member for just $1 a month. There is exclusive content over there. We are working on adding ad-free episodes, so those would have none of the YouTube ads. They would not have the sponsored ad read. It would just be the straight video, and that would go up it would probably go up the same time and same day, just because of our work schedule. But point is, Patreon's going to be a lot more worth it in the coming months, and we hope you'll check it out. If you'd like to support us in other ways, you can do that by going to tableauroastingco.com and purchasing Mount Pocono Perk, our signature coffee blend that I, a former barista at an artisan coffee shop that did all of our in-house roasting. I did not do the roasting, but I knew how the roasting worked, and I had to know every single detail about the flavor profiles. Anyway, I designed that coffee. You can also get our merch from bunkerbranding.com under the Lore Lodge section. We have several t-shirts and hoodie designs, and we're working on a hat. Now, if you're looking for more Lodge, you can do that by heading over to the Weird Bible, checking out History Unhinged, or seeing my personal channel where we mostly stream video games, but I'm hoping to get back into reaction content sometime this summer. And when I say reaction, I more mean commentary on paranormal videos. And specifically, I mean like allegedly real paranormal videos. If you want to know when stuff is coming out, engage further with the community, and play video games with us, stuff like that, you can go check out our Discord at bit.ly/jointhelodge, or you can click the link in the description, which will take you right there. We also have our live show, which airs Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, unless it doesn't, and if it doesn't, we'll tell you. And if you're not able to catch that live, it's here on YouTube as a video on demand, or you can catch it on any podcast platform on the Wednesday after it airs. Last but not least, I would like to thank Factor once again for sponsoring this video and so many of our others. They have been a phenomenal brand partner, and we really do strongly recommend them if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. With all that said, I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.